I want to bring forward. The universe is an orderly flow. The universe is structured. The universe is predictable, and for what it's worth, there is a very clear window by which the universe can be designed that allows us to be alive within it, and to deal with it with any form of understanding whatsoever. You could argue that we just really totally lucked out. The point is that science cannot prove or disprove. All it can do is observe, send out observations, infer relationships, and from the inferred relationship, determine principles whereby we can determine further relationships. The scripture talks about relationships. When we are children, we are raised by our parents. The reason that we're told to honor our father and mother is because that is our earliest training in what relationship is. We learn dependence, we learn love, we learn independence, we learn how to be responsible, we learn the difference between what is good and what is not good, and eventually we learn ourselves to be caretakers. It is a progression. The scripture tells us how we relate to Yah as our Father, our provider, our King, and the one who guides us in knowing what is good and what is not, who shows us the purpose of our lives, and from finding that purpose, we derive our joy. And so, the first thing I'm saying is that the relationship that you have grown up in prepares you to understand the relationship that you have described. The universe in which we live being orderly, based on relationships between objects, things that you can count on, things you can rely on, also prepares us to understand that there is an orderly principle, the same one who created the universe in a physical sense, created the universe in a moral sense, created the universe in a spiritual sense. It reflects his nature. And therefore, as Paul says, nobody has any excuse not to know the basics about who God is. You were raised by parents who were examples. Maybe some better than others. You are in a universe which demonstrates the power, the orderliness, the reliability, the provision, and so forth of Yah just as much as the scriptures. And therefore there is no reason that anybody can give to say that the testimony of nature and the testimony of the Bible are two different things. They attest to the same God. In fact, it opens with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, this was actually a very radical statement. Because if you look at most creation myths, the gods are formed by some interaction with chaos. They were not creators. They were creations. They were very powerful creations. And in most cases, they were powerful creations that you wanted to have ignore you because they were whimsical. And yet, we live in an orderly universe. They do not reflect what we see in the universe. What we see is a God who not only created that which fills space and time, but who created space and time and all the principles upon space and time. We try to understand him and what he has created from inside. And there are two ways we do that. One is by careful observation of what goes on around. This is the only testimony we got. All we can do is say, based on what we observe, is this a reasonable premise? And actually it is. We know that the universe was created. We know that it does not start at an infinitely far point back in time, and it's not going to go to an infinitely far point into the future. It was created. It has a beginning and an end. This is not evidence that the universe is a clockwork and we don't need a God. It is evidence that there is a creator. Because the universe could have come out any way you could imagine, and yet we are told that you start off with what is tohu vibohu, formless and void, which means there were no natural laws. There was no place in which to place those natural laws. All of that was created by God. He was not subject to the natural laws of the universe. He designed them. And we can learn about him by seeing just how precisely and how powerful they are. So, having come to understand that the universe is a testimony to God, what does Paul say about this? So first, I'm going to start a little bit earlier. So I'm going to start in Romans 1, verse 16. And he says, "For I am not ashamed of the good news, since it is God's powerful means of bringing salvation to everyone who keeps on trusting, to the Jew especially, but equally to the Greek." Now, let me comment on that. First, we have no cause to be ashamed whatsoever. We are trained by our society to think that if we believe in something supernatural, we are being unscientific. That is totally ridiculous. Science has no comment whatsoever on the Creator or on what is behind the creation. Science is a process whereby we determine the behavior of repeatable phenomena, things that happen naturally over and over again. So science does not disprove miracles. Miracles are utterly irrelevant to science. What you can do with science is say that this thing is not likely to have spontaneously happened, which, as I'm making the point, our universe is a classic example. Our universe was not likely to spontaneously happen. Therefore, our best guess, based on the testimony of the only witness we have, is that it was a deliberate and orderly creation. And so I want you to have the confidence that you do not need to be ashamed of the good news. It makes more sense than the alternative. Anybody who tries to make you ashamed is using what is traditionally called an ad hominem argument. What that means is that because they cannot attack your thought processes, they will attack you personally. The goal not being to understand what the truth is, but to silence you so that they can put forth whatever form of the truth or appearance of the truth they want to put forward. The more somebody tries to shame you about what you are trying to express, the more confident you can be that you're probably right. That has been my general experience. So I want you to be confident. And it is God's powerful means of bringing salvation to everyone who keeps on trusting. Now, trusting is a good word to use because faith has been sort of imbued with the sense of blindness, which honestly it does not have. Trust is a term, in fact, let me back up a little bit. Most people think inside the box that they have been raised in. The hardest thing to learn is how to move yourself outside of that box. One of the easiest ways to do that is to use a different word, a more neutral word. So rather than talking about faith, talk about trust. If you talk about faith, people are going to have been in a box whereby they look at faith as being exclusively regarding religious experience, as not regarding evidence, as being something you trust in without having a reason, which it is not, but that is the implication. That is the box people come from. There's no reason to fight somebody else's box when you don't have to. One of the first rules of science and engineering is the art of constructive laziness. Always do something the simplest and easiest possible way. And that goes the same with expressing truth. Don't make it hard. And so when you use the word trust, well, you know what? Science is based totally on trust. We trust that the universe is real. Can't prove it, but we trust that it's real. We trust that this thing here, this music stand, say, this book, are real things. And we find that basically, you know what, when I turn this page this way, I go, oh, well, I see this. When I turn it back to what I think is the same page, you know what? The same print is on it. I think this book is real. Because when I turn over and I turn back, I get the same thing. It's that simple. That's science. That's really what it is. And it's the same trust that you need to have in the process that you're using and the principles that have been proven by repeated experiment, by repeated observation, are the same things that we rely on in terms of trusting God. We know we can trust God. We know Him. We have seen with our eyes, felt with our hearts, heard with our ears the results of the relationship we have with Him, and therefore we have a verified, trusting reason to believe. And the foundation of that is here expressed as salvation, which I would say is restoration of relationship. We are created to be in relationship with God, just as our bodies are created to be in relationship with the physical world. We are made up of matter. Our bodies are made up of matter. We are connected to that matter by our brains and our nerves and so on. But who we are is connected to, but not limited by, that matter. We are the patterns, we are the thoughts, we are the memories, we are the motivations, we are the intangible that work that expresses through this matter who we are. That is what it is to be a living soul, to be a spirit, and that is relationship. We have relationship with each other, we have relationship with God. And salvation is about establishing a proper relationship with God so that we are fully expressed as who we are. So that's what Paul's talking about, is God's powerful means of bringing salvation. That's the good news. It's not an intellectual thing, any more than, frankly, as you can probably tell, those of you who know me, science for me is not an intellectual thing. It is a passion, because it's a way of understanding the truth. And it is a blast, and it is fun. And so is following Yah. So is following the good news. It is sacrifice, is giving up something good for something better. You are not basically supposed to suffer horribly in this world in order to gain enough merit to gain joy in the next. You are supposed to have joy in this world. The fundamental of joy, just as the fundamental of science is what you observe is what there is. That's it. Now, I mean, it's not the totality of reality, but what I'm saying is, if you don't like the numbers you're measuring, you don't change them. You figure out what they mean. We, likewise, in the spiritual reality in which we live, we are surrounded by circumstances. There are things that influence us from the physical realm, from the spiritual realm, from the emotional realm. And the purpose of the good news is to establish a relationship with Yah in such a way that circumstances do not control us. Our joy comes from Yah, not from our circumstances. Happiness is getting what you want. Joy is wanting what you get. And Yah calls us to want what we get. Just as in science, the scientific observations, the results you have are what they are, not what you want them to be. But by receiving them as they are and seeking to understand them, you are led to a truth that is awesome and cool and really neat to find because you weren't expecting it. Just so, joy leads to things that you do not expect that are much better than anything that you could have gotten by choosing what you want to be happy about. It's the same thing, the same idea. You receive what is there and you take joy in it. Just as a scientist discovers what is there and gains understanding from that. It's the same sort of idea, the same sort of order, the same underlying reality, because the same God created the heavens and the earth, created the principles underlying the universe, and created the moral and spiritual universe with the same nature as he created the physical. So what Paul does say about the Proto Evangelion, the gospel before the gospel, actually sounds a little bit harsh at the beginning. What is revealed is God's anger from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who in their wickedness keep suppressing the truth, because what is known about God is plain to them, since God has made it plain to them. I don't know if you've noticed, but the universe isn't exactly hiding from you. I mean, I imagine, how many of you out there are cold?
Right here.
Yeah, there you are, you're cold. That's because there is a lack of heat in the air. The universe is not hiding this from us. Just so, the universe is not hiding God's nature from us. It is not hiding. In fact, it is one of the purposes, I believe firmly that just as it says, that which is revealed belongs to us and our children, that which is hidden belongs to God. But it also says it is the glory of kings to search out a matter. It is the glory of Yah to conceal it. It is part of our stewardship of the universe to seek to understand it and to rejoice in it and to have a sense of wonder. And it's big enough that we'll be able to do that pretty much for all eternity. So, which I think is great, because basically if I understood the entire universe, I would be very bored. And I don't like being bored. But so I think in terms of anger, what we have is the extreme frustration of a God who has created this wonderful, wonderful universe for us to live in, who has created each of us out of his love. And, you know, and think about this. This is the most amazing thing about it all, is we are embedded in space and time. We are buffeted by all these things around us. And yet, we are made in God's image in such a way that we can love him and he can love us. We have the most fundamental thing in the universe, relationship, in common with the Creator. And he enjoys having relationship with us. That's why we were created, to love and be loved. Frankly, that's why we are given the power of choice. God didn't want us to be an affectionate rock. He didn't want us to be robots. We needed to choose. And just as light implies the absence of light, which is darkness, just so love implies the absence of love, which is spiritual darkness. And so what Paul is saying is that God is incredibly frustrated by people rejecting relationship with him, rejecting, that is godlessness, rejecting relationship with each other, which is wickedness, and in that wickedness they keep suppressing the truth. And we know this. We live in a society which tries very hard to suppress the truth. We are called, Yeshua told us, to be as wise as serpents and innocent as doves, to understand how things work. Not to be naive, but to be wise. And yet to have a dove, basically when a dove looks at something, that dove focuses on it and goes for that thing. And so the dove is innocent in the sense that the dove knows its goal and goes to that goal. And we know that our goal is to have that relationship with Yah. And we focus on it. But the world wants us to be as wise as doves and innocent as serpents. Because anybody who is embroiled in that chaos, for some reason, some aspect of human nature is saying, if I can't have that relationship, if I choose not to have it, I want everybody else to be equally miserable. And I want to derive my joy from taking away from others what they have been given, so I can enjoy it for myself. As opposed to God's economy, which is that the more that we care for each other, the more we ourselves are cared for. That the relationships we have with each other are not a zero-sum game, but that each one builds one on the other, so that in the end, the relationship, well, I'll put it this way. Basically, there's a saying that if you have two Jews, you have three opinions. And that is actually accurate because each one has their own opinion, and then from the discussion they have with each other, they generate another one. Just so when you have a relationship with others, you have your love, they have their love, and then there is something between you which is greater than the two things that you have separately, which is part of what we offer up to God. And therefore we end up with more than we started out with. But it requires the same courage that a scientist has when they have a pet theory and they're willing to have it tested. I mean, one of the rules of science is your best friend is the person who tries to prove you wrong. Because the goal is to understand truth, not to be right. And you learn more, frankly, from being wrong and discovering something new than from being right. So likewise, our purpose in life is to grow. We will make mistakes. The goal is to only make them once, to not repeat them, and to learn from the mistakes of others, which is why we write things down, why we have the Torah. So, because what is known about God is plain to them. This is another principle that you need to understand, especially about dealing with atheists. Atheists don't really disbelieve in God. They're just really mad at him, as a general rule. They don't want to believe, therefore they are finding reasons not to. If you try to convince somebody by purely logical argument, by proving that they're wrong, their argument is wrong, all you're doing is pushing them into the same cesspool in which they have placed themselves. What you need to do is find a way to help them give themselves permission to be right. Now, one of my favorite techniques, which has actually worked amazingly well, is if I talk about, I believe in God, and the person says, well, I don't believe in God, and I say, well, you don't believe in God? No. Well, why not? Well, because he's this and this. So tell me about this God you don't believe in. And they tell me, well, he's vengeful, he's angry, he's judgmental and everything. And I go, cool, I don't believe in that God either. And it breaks them out and gives them the opportunity to reorient their mind. They've expressed themselves. They say, this is why I don't believe in God. I say, I don't believe in that God. That God doesn't exist. I'm really glad that God doesn't exist because he sounds yucky. And now you're open to investigating, well then, what is there? You've opened up the category. So basically, the goal is not to win arguments. Arguments, when you win an argument, implicit in that is, I won, you lost. The whole purpose is to win relationships so that the two of you come out with something more true than either of you went in with. Amen. That is the best thing to do. That is the strategy you need to follow when you're dealing with somebody who wants to deny the existence of God. Don't argue with them about the existence of God. Guide them to the point where they can start receiving for themselves, by their own nature, by their own thoughts, by their own understanding, that there is something out there, someone out there, that they would like to consider getting to know. Because that's the nature of the universe. That's where we are at. And so, ever since the creation of the universe, his invisible qualities. Now, invisible, I keep talking about observing. Now, here's the thing. Okay, we see scroll, chair, apple, Corvette, whatever. I mean, wind, lots of wind, and cold, lots of cold. But we see those things in circumstances. But there is a principle behind these things. That is what we as scientists try to understand, the principles behind the physical universe, so that to understand an apple is to understand more than the apple, but everything that has to do with appleness and beyond that, the realm of the world. Those are invisible qualities. The reality of what God created is more based on these invisible qualities. The visible things are objects that manifest the invisible qualities of what God has created. The invisible is what is the most real, because everything is built on that. And therefore, that is evident to us. Basically, just because if somebody understands apple, it doesn't mean they have to learn about oranges all over again. You have an idea of fruit. You have an idea of round. And so those invisible qualities, both his eternal power, that he created the entire universe, space and time, everything there is, and his divine nature, his holiness, that things are definitely one thing or another. Holiness is being set apart. There are things that are good, there are things that are bad. There are things that are nice, there are things that are disgusting. There are things that are red, there are things that are blue. That is the nature of what he's created. There are distinctions that we can understand, that we can count on, that we can work with, that we can rely on to make choices. They are not hidden. You don't basically go out to the car and go, well, gosh, if I turn this key, will the physical laws of the universe allow my engine to work this morning? If you turn the key and the car doesn't start, you assume there is a cause to it that has to do with something wrong with the engine. If you go out into the night, you turn on your flashlight, and you don't get any light, you don't assume that it was just too dark for the flashlight to work. You assume you need to replace the battery. Just so, God's invisible qualities can be relied upon 100%. And we know this. Every human being, honestly, we all know this. We all know that there are things we can count on. Otherwise, we could not function at all. And so that's what Paul's talking about. The physical universe has told us, if I pick up a rock and I drop it, it will fall to the ground. If I turn this page and turn it back, the writing on the page will be the same. That's all Paul's saying. That testifies to God right there. There is a universe. It is orderly. We can count on it. It is a creation. And so therefore they have no excuse. Because although they know who God is, that's a pretty bold statement. They know who God is. So if you're trying to convince somebody about who God is, you're preaching to a very deeply buried choir. The goal is for them to see that they know who God is. It's not basically showing somebody this is who God is. It's bringing out of them what they already know about God in a way that they can receive it. That can be trickier, but it also builds beautiful relationships. So they do not glorify him as God or thank him. They don't recognize his eternal qualities, that he is awesome and incredible, and so give him glory. They do not see the distinctions that he has made that allow us to live, to thank him for providing for us. And so on the contrary, they have become futile in their thinking. If you do not understand how something works, it will not work when you try to use it. If you take a screwdriver and try to drive a nail into the wall, you will have a very hard time. If you take a hammer and try to screw a screw into the wall, you will have a very hard time. If you refuse to understand the nature of your own being and you try to live, you will have a very hard time. It's that simple. Don't make it complicated. It's very simple. And their undiscerning hearts have become darkened. When you don't know God, you don't know yourself, and you don't know how to live. If you don't know that, life is hard. Even if you're partying and you think you're having a good time, you're really not. You're just basically putting in time and trying to make it tolerable. And your heart is darkened because you're frustrated. Paul talks about anger from heaven, how God is frustrated when we don't know him. We get frustrated when we don't know him. But unfortunately, and then claiming to be wise, they have become fools. One of my favorite sayings for students, I've had students who've been incredibly frustrated about learning things. In fact, one student was taking self-paced physics. He kept failing this class, this one section, over and over and over. He couldn't get through it. And I finally walk up to him and say, look, I know you're smart. I've seen you pass all this other stuff, but this one, for some reason, you can't get through it. What is the problem? And he said, I don't want to tell you. I'm too embarrassed. I say, just tell me. And he told me what it was. There is a very simple thing he never had in school. And I said, oh, well. And he said, and it makes me feel stupid. I said, you're not stupid. Your teacher was stupid. I mean, look, ignorance is easy to fix. Stupidity is very hard to fix. Ignorance is about learning about what is with an open heart. Stupidity is about refusing to learn what is with a stubborn heart. Open your heart, open your mind, be willing to receive what's there, trust Yah that he will do what he says he will do, and you'll get right through it. You will get right through it. And so it says, in fact, they have exchanged the glory of the immortal God for mere images, like a mortal human being, or like birds, animals, or reptiles. I mean, if the measure of man is man, then you've got a totally inadequate measuring stick to become anything more than who you already are. If you measure yourself by who you are right now, how in the world are you ever going to get bigger? When you measure yourself by Yah's standard and take falling short not as something to be ashamed of, but of something to deal with, that Yah has created you to be finite but growing. You accept that. When you make a mistake, you learn from it, you become better, and you take joy in that process. And you will grow. But if you keep making your measure a human being, or even worse, a bird, an animal, a reptile, I mean, I like dogs, but I wouldn't want to I wouldn't want my existence to be limited to being only as good as a dog. And yet that's what people do. Because they're intimidated by anything bigger than themselves, rather than challenged by the joy of growing. And fundamentally, that's what pride is about. Our world is governed by pride. We want to be bigger than everything around us. When the real joy is growing into a greater purpose that Yah has prepared in advance for us to do. That's what we were created to be. A child is created to grow. We don't stop being children in his sight. We are created to grow our entire lives. We are created to live until our bodies stop functioning. And then we go on to the millennial kingdom with better bodies. That's who we are. Enjoy it. And so this is why God has given them up to the vileness of their heart's lusts, to the shameful misuse of each other's bodies, and so on. What it comes down to is this. If you try to live down to a low purpose, you will almost certainly succeed. If you try to become the worst you can possibly be, you can probably achieve that. And what's really sad is how we make that, we idealize that, we glorify that, and we go for the exact opposite of who we were created to be. And so this is what Paul is talking about. He's talking about when you're dealing with a world which does not explicitly know the scripture. People don't know this book. The first thing you have to do is help them to receive the very basics of what is in it. And when somebody comes to faith, the tradition is to give them the Gospel of John. But the first thing that we see in here is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He created light. He separated the light. He separated the waters. He created the plants. He created animals. And in the end, he created us to be in fellowship with him. And then from the one of us, he created two of us to be in fellowship together. That is the first news that people need to receive. Nothing else makes sense until you understand that. And so, there's a lot of detail. Basically, how to think clearly about something. Just to say that, don't be afraid to think clearly. Don't be afraid to challenge a belief. One of the biggest challenges I had was as being confronted with anti-missionaries, with people who were trying to convince me that Yeshua was not the Messiah. I decided, you know what? There's only one way to deal with this without fear. I'm going to go in and I'm going to look at it objectively. And when I was done, I was so totally convinced that nothing could shake me. But it required the courage to go in and see what did God really say, rather than lean on what I was comfortable with already. That is what we need to do with the scriptures. We need to read them. We need to see what's in them. We need to understand what God is saying, not what we want God to say, and move from understanding to understanding. And when we don't understand something, there's a very important phrase. I want you to practice it. So, this is the phrase. I don't know. Okay, everybody repeat that. I don't know.
I don't know.
Okay, practice it until you're comfortable saying it, because it's the best way to grow is to be able to say I don't know when you really don't. Don't try to cover it up. Most people can tell. When you don't know something, say I don't know, but I'd like to find out. Would you like to find out together? And then you've got somebody who can come with you, walk beside you, and own it, and receive it for themselves. Because there's nothing that causes somebody to receive something than if they believe that they thought of it themselves. And so and like I said, this is what Paul's saying. We know in our heart of hearts that there is a God. We know that he's orderly. We know that he loves us. That is the Proto Evangelion that is implanted in every one of us. And if, in dealing with the world around us, we help the person bring that out of themselves rather than impose it on them from the outside, they will own it in a way that they will never own it if it's pushed on them as something that came from outside of themselves, as opposed to something that they can see grew from their own heart, from their own mind, from their own being. So this has been a little bit of a ramble, and kind of deliberately so, because, I like to be rigorous. In my work, I have to be very rigorous. In studying Torah, I try to be very rigorous, because basically a teacher is judged doubly, not merely for what they believe and learn, but for the quality of what they teach. So what I teach, I want to make sure that I have examined it and have something proper to present in a right way, from which you can then check and just see exactly how wrong I am. And hopefully come and tell me so that I can become smarter, because that's how we all grow. So in conclusion, what I'm wanting to talk about in this season of Sukkot, where we are sitting in our Sukkot under the stars of heaven, surrounded by the fruits and the branches that Yah has created, that there is a good news to which this is a testimony delivered to us by Yah, which reinforces the testimony of our very being, of the universe in which we live, the wonderful things of which we partake, the love of our parents, the love that we have for each other, the love that we then understand that Yah has for us in his creation and in relationship. This is a good time to understand that there is a revelation that goes deep to the core of our very natures. And this revelation is to bring what is written on our hearts, the Torah written on our hearts, into conscious reality where we can nourish it, feed it, encourage it, and walk it in a deliberate, in a joyful, and in a powerful way. That is the purpose of our lives. And you know what? I can't think of anything I would rather do. Yes. So, amen. So let's pray. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father and our King, help us to glean from this an understanding, a love, a sympathy, and a relationship, even with those who most strongly oppose us and oppose your truth. Put within us a love for you, a love for your creation, a love for our purpose, the humility to receive our limits, and the courage to always work past them, knowing that our measure is not limited by who we are, but by who you have created us to be. And that every single person whom we can show the truth that is already in their heart, the bully that torments us, the boss that persecutes us, the people who foul-mouth us, Yah, that when we bring that out and establish a positive and light-filled relationship with them, that we have a greater victory, a far greater victory than if we prove them wrong, stump them down, and eliminate their presence. Help us to have hearts that desire to not merely increase but multiply the light by ourselves being lights, enjoying being lights, rejoice in being lights, and making no excuses for not being lights, but knowing that the circumstances around us are much smaller than the God who created the universe in which they occur, and that we are more than conquerors through him who created us. We ask this in your holy name, B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach. Amen.